Everybody. So this is the second half of chapter one notes. Some of the stuff is actually in chapter two, but we've talked so far about the Spanish in the Americas. Now, I want to cover the other major powers that get involved in what will become the United States. So the last slide you saw was us talking about Spanish settlement in the future U.S. and the southwestern part of the United States and all these missions. Now we're going to switch geographically and we are going to go to the east coast of what is the United States. So here we go. What about the French? All right. So what are the French motivated by? We think about the Spanish being motivated by God and gold. And it's not that the French aren't devout Catholics at the time and they aren't motivated by money, but phenomenal. Part of what they wanted to do was find a way to get to China. And they thought that they could get what they call the Northwest Passage. They thought that they'd find some place through the Americas to get to go around the globe. And to that end, they go up all sorts of rivers and are going to eventually explore up the St. Lawrence River, which is over here, and they get to this Great Lake, and they get to this Great Lake, and they get to this Great Lake, and they keep working their way up the Great Lakes, and they don't get any closer to the Northwest Passage because there isn't a Northwest Passage in what is today the United States. The only Northwest Passage that exists is actually in northern Canada, which is open sometimes when the ice is clear. But beyond not finding Northwest Passage, once they get into the Americas, they find that it is abundant in fur. In particular, the most valuable of the furs is the beaver, because Europeans had wiped out almost all beaver furs. And why are we interested in beavers? Beavers have very warm fur. Think about what they do. They go underground. I love little beavers. Ooh, little beaver, little buck teeth. Anyway, so they're motivated by finding the fur. And they also fish off the coast here and actually fish in the Great Lakes, but really off the coast here. So they're motivated by fish and fur. Their early explorers are Verrazano. Verrazano actually comes into New York Harbor. It does not claim it for France, but there's what's called the Verrazano Narrows Bridge today that goes across New York Harbor. When I ran the New York City Marathon 2 years ago, you actually start on the bridge and run all 26 miles back into New York City. Pretty cool. Cartier is also one of the early French explorers. However, northern Canada, that kind of thing. The ultimate guy who's considered sort of the father of New France, which is what they're going to call this area, is Samuel de Champlain. And Samuel de Champlain is the guy who founds Quebec in 1608. And Quebec is right here. He founds the city of Quebec and is going to become kind of the base and capital of French Canada, which they call New France. And French Canada predominantly gets built up with settlers from France along the St. Lawrence River. Now, I should note that there are not that many Frenchmen who come to the Americas, maybe 40,000 by the 1750s. Now, see all this claimed area for France? Sure, this is all French territory, but note it's mainly Native Americans. And the Frenchmen are going to trade with the Native Americans. They have these voyageurs or queue de bois, which are people who are French who go up the Great Lakes and down these rivers in order to interact with Native Americans and buy furs. And typically what would happen is the furs would get hunted for. They would get brought to forts that the French established throughout New France, and then the French would show up and then buy the furs. The Native Americans got manufactured goods and beads and all that kind of thing, and the French got furs. And the French would ship most of these furs back to Europe, and they make a mint off this. Arguably, it's probably better they did this than finding gold in the New World. These guys would canoe to get the French, to get the furs. And in fact, there's a bunch of impacts here on Wisconsin. A lot of Wisconsin names are French. So we look at Green Bay was originally a French fur trader. Prairie du Chien, Prairie of the Dog, in the western part of Wisconsin. Fort Trempealeau. What would happen is the French could come down the Fox River, and then Portage, at what is today Portage, Lake Portage in our conference. They'd walk across that, and then they get to the Wisconsin River, and they could take the Wisconsin River all the way down to the Mississippi River. They have a whole series of forts in Wisconsin. Eventually, they established St. Louis down in Missouri. Anyway, a bunch of French names, and we have that as marks in Wisconsin. Now, because the French are trading with Native Americans, they're going to not try to destroy the Native Americans. In fact, it's mainly French males who come to the New World, and they're looking for females, and the available females are natives. So there's a lot of connection between the French and the Native Americans genetically in the years the French there. And this means there's a lot of peace also. The French are not trying to wipe out the Native Americans, they're just trying to trade fur. So largely when Native Americans eventually fight with the British, they support the French. They are Catholic. In fact, a lot of Native American tribes are still Catholic due to the Catholic influence of the French. And there's actually very little growth. French Canada stays pretty sparsely populated. Yes, you have these forts, and yes, there's a pretty dense agricultural area here in New France or in along the St. Lawrence River, but overall, not as much. And then the Iroquois tribe here end up being a buffer between the British colony and the French. The British don't have the success the French do, at least not right off the bat. So that's where the French are at. Now, let's talk about the Dutch. All right, so the Dutch are motivated by money, not to a large extent by God. They want to make cash. They're motivated by mercantilism. Just to review, mercantilism is the idea that you have colonies. These colonies are supposed to make you a net profit. So wealth should flow from the colonies to you. Raw materials come from the colony. They get manufactured into goods, and those goods get sold back to the colony. The colony should be subservient to the motherland, if you will. The British or the Dutch. Oh, by the way, if you're Dutch, what European country are you from today? It is the Netherlands, aka Holland. So Dutch, Holland, Netherlands, same darn thing. And the company or the Dutch are going to explore. Henry Hudson is going to find, go figure, the Hudson River, which flows through New York and New York State. The Hudson River starts, unfortunately, covered up, but New York City's down here, and the Hudson River goes right up the Hudson River Valley. It is not called New York at the time now. It is going to be called the New Netherlands. The Netherlands. The capital of New Netherlands is going to be New Amsterdam, which is today New York City. So the Dutch found a fort at the tip of Manhattan. And this is unfortunately, this should be north over here, but this is the tip of Manhattan. Notably, the Dutch build a wall here to keep out invaders, and people are like, oh, Native Americans. Now they're actually more afraid of, say, the English showing up and taking over. This wall later gets taken down, but the street along the wall becomes Wall Street. So that is a Dutch leftover. And there's also an area down here where there is still a fort. In fact, this is where you go to go see the Statue of Liberty. The site of this fort is still the site of a fort. It's got a nice park there, and that's the Dutch thing. Otherwise, if you go into southern Manhattan, there's not really any Dutch leftovers in terms of buildings. However, a lot of names in the New York area are Dutch. So like the Bronx, Harlem, those are Dutch names. I'm trying to think of a few other ones. Anyway, and then they found Fort Orange, which is in upstate New York. Fort Orange, after the Orangemen, get that in a second. Fort Orange is after the color that's most associated with the Netherlands. Today, Syracuse University is called the Orangemen, and their mascot is literally an orange fruit, which is stupid because they're orange after the orange of the Dutch. Anyway, Hudson River Valley gets populated by these large plantations of sorts. The Dutch do have some amount of slavery, but when I say plantations, I just mean large agricultural settings. And these Dutch are patroons, they call themselves. These patroons own land up and down the Hudson River. The patroons end up being very wealthy, and in fact, their families end up carrying money all the way into arguably the 20th century. Here are some famous Dutch names: Van Buren, later U.S. president; Roosevelt, 2 U.S. presidents, and not Vanderbilt, railroad guy. That is Vanderbilt. That's Dutch. Okay, so there is a legacy there. Unfortunately, and we'll get to this later, for the Dutch, they are going to get kicked out by the English. One of their wars in the late 1800s or mid 1600 gets them kicked out, but it is the Dutch. The Dutch don't have a ton of long-lasting impact in the Americas, but those place names at least still stick, and some of those family names are going to stick. Okay, and finally, let's talk a little bit about the English. English are a little bit late to the game. They end up with a large class of poor people due to enclosure. In Great Britain, there used to be open fields where anyone could graze and plant crops and that kind of thing. And then wealthy landowners are going to start enclosing those into, hey, I own this, I own this, I own this. You have a class of rural people who move to the cities, a whole bunch of people who are really poor in England, and they need to have some kind of an outlet. And one of those outlets is the idea that that you have colonies you can send these poor people to. The other thing is a religious piece. England has a whole bunch of religious turmoil. We start off with Martin Luther, of course, in Germany, establishing the Lutheran Church, but then there's also other breakoffs of the Catholic Church. And Henry VIII, for example, is going to found the Church of England. Great, Church of England. However, the Church of England is super intolerant of other religions. So he forms that to get divorced and those kind of things, but maintains the Church of England. There are what we call Calvinists who evolve into Puritans. The Puritans, Calvinists, are going to consider the Church of England to be too Catholic. And the Puritans want to have church and state be married together. They want to have religious rules, so like dress codes, language codes, all those kind of things. And the Puritans want to get rid of statues and a lot of the other things that are in Catholic churches, which the Church of England churches are former Catholic churches. And to a large extent, it didn't look any different to be in a Church of England church in, say, 1600. There's a group called the Separatists who are going to want to literally separate from the Church of England. So that's like Puritans going to the next level. And then another group that gets founded in this era are the Quakers. And the Quakers are also known as the Society of Friends. So we'll get to them later. But we have a lot of religious turmoil in England, and who's going to be in charge, and are you going to accept other religions? And if you don't, where are you going to put all those people? Maybe the New World. Spoiler alert. The British are going to go to the New World for trade and wealth. There's also another underlying conflict is you're competing with the English, and the English are going to have a bunch of pirates, sea dogs as they call them. Basically, it's government authorized pirates. Notably, Sir Francis Drake was someone who was supposed to attack Spanish shipping. Additionally, they want to set up these plantations. In fact, up until this year, the official name of Rhode Island was Rhode Island and Plymouth Plantation. So that was out there. Anyway, not Plymouth. It is Plymouth Plantation. Anyway, okay. Continuing on. So the English's first attempt at a colony in the New World is going to be at Roanoke. Roanoke is one of these islands barrier islands off the coast of North Carolina. And Walter Raleigh, one of the Queen Elizabeth's favorites, is going to establish this colony. And he gets the blessing of Elizabeth I to do this. And in fact, to flatter Elizabeth I, the whole area, it's not called North Carolina yet, the whole area is called Virginia. Why is it called Virginia? A little embarrassing, but we're praising Elizabeth I's supposed virginity. So we actually have a state named after the sexual status of a former Queen of England. Not to give you any names, but think about if we named several other states after people's sexual histories. Anyway, so they end up establishing this colony at Roanoke, and the guy in charge of doing this is going to be John White. And Raleigh sponsors it, but John White is the official commander, and then Richard Grenville is the leader. These names are not particularly important, but Raleigh doesn't end up going to the colony, but John White does, and Richard Grenville does. They end up here. John White is going to leave. In an interesting piece of trivia, Virginia Dare is going to be the first English person born in the New World, and she was born at Roanoke. So John White leaves, he goes back, and unfortunately, blocking his journey is going to be the Spanish Armada, only in the sense that he gets wrapped up in that whole fighting, and he does not get back until 1590. So he leaves saying, hey, I'll be back in 6 months, a year, and doesn't return for 3 years. Gets back to Roanoke and finds Everyone's gone. All the white people are gone. The only thing that's left are the ruins of a kind of fort they built and some of the buildings. But on one of the fort palisades, carved is the words Croatan. And White's like, I don't know what happened. He looks around a little bit and he's like, well, I guess they're just all gone. No one today knows what actually happened to the settlers at Roanoke. It is a complete failure. There is some thought, and this is probably the most likely theory, that the settlers blended in with the local tribe, which were called the Croatan tribe. So it's remarkable that White didn't have a little more curiosity to look around and find the local tribe. There's also evidence in North Carolina of later English settlers coming in and finding Native Americans who spoke some English words, and they may have been the descendants of some of the whites who then intermarried with some of the Native Americans. Conspiracy theorists will say, oh, they got abducted by aliens. So who knows? Maybe an alien ship will land someday and drop off the Roanoke settlers. I would not hold my breath for that one. Anyway, that is a complete failure on the part of the English. Complete failure. So if you're going up to 1606 or so, the English are a failure in their settlements. Now, the French are a little bit after that, but they're successful, and the Dutch are fairly successful. But when you look at when you first start, how does it work? English are the worst. English are the worst. All right, so we will stop with that. Y'all have a lovely day. Bye bye.